We have now opened a web browser on our computer, and we will access our Big IP appliance through the web utility. So in the address field up here, we're going to first type in HTTPS, followed by the management IP address that we set up, which is 254. Let's make an exception for this address. And from there, we are redirected to the login page. So here, the default username and password would be admin. So admin and admin. Okay, so now we are logged in, and the only configuration option available to us is the SetupUtility. So in order to set up load balancing, we have to complete the SetupUtility. So that is a requirement. So very quickly about the general look of this page. So up here on the top, you will see the host name. Now this is the default, and we will change that later as part of the SetupUtility. This is the management IP that we're using to log in. You'll see the date and time, the username that we use to log in, and the role of that account, which is administrator. And of course, you see no license exists for this device. So that's why the only thing available to us is this SetupUtility. And this is basically listing each step that is going to happen for going through the SetupUtility. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started by clicking on Next for the welcome screen. Okay, so the first part is to activate the license, which will contain the specific application modules that will be supported on our Big IP appliance. So we got a license for the LTM module, and that will provide server load balancing in our data center. So let's go ahead and click on Activate. We can install the license either automatically from the F5 license servers or do it manually. Now, using the manual approach is common if the Big IP appliance is not able to access the internet from the management network itself. But also on this page, you would need to supply a registration key that will be provided to you by a F5 reseller. So we have our registration key, but back to the activation method here. If you do select automatic, let's go ahead and do that quickly. It will select one of the interfaces for the outbound interface, but nothing is configured yet on our appliance for the LAN and WAN facing interfaces. That is why this section is for temporary network settings that you can set up, the temporary IP mask and default gateway. Or we can change the outbound interface by going right up here to be perhaps the management interface instead. And then from there, you would put in your base registration key and everything will be activated on the appliance automatically. But in our case, to keep things simple, we will select manual for the activation method. Next, let's input the registration key that was provided to us. Okay, then we'll click on Next to continue. On this page, based on the registration key that we entered, we are provided with a unique registration license here called a dossier, where we can either download this as a file, or we can copy then paste this into the F5 licensing server webpage. Now this page also nicely lays out the different steps needed for activating the license, where step 1 is to copy or download the dossier. So let's go ahead and copy this now. We'll select all here and then copy. Then to go to the F5 licensing server, which we can access directly from this link right here. Let's go here. And here on the Activate F5 product page, we can paste our dossier here in the space, or we can upload the file if we chose to download it to our computer. So let's paste the dossier into this open field here. Then we'll click on Next to continue. Let's accept the license agreement on this page. And finally, we are provided with the actual license that we need to apply to our Big IP appliance. We can either download this license file, we can do that, or we can simply copy the contents of the license file. With the license contents copied, let's go back to our Big IP appliance, right up here, and let's apply the contents of the license under step 3 license, then click on Next. Okay, so now our Big IP appliance is being configured and then verified based on the license file that we applied. When that completes, we will continue. This will redirect us to the resource provisioning page, which will show all available Big IP modules that can be used on our appliance and which ones are licensed. So based on the features or modules that are licensed to us, we can allocate resources to them based on the amount of CPU and memory resources they could have. But again, these modules right here can be the LTM or can be maybe GTM, which you see listed here. But we are only licensed for two specific modules. That will be the Application Visibility and Reporting module, or AVR, and the other module is Local Traffic, or LTM. So this module is the focus in this video series. Now back to the details of what this page is actually providing, which is the resource provisioning. So at the top here, you'll see the total number of CPU, disk, and memory resources. You can see how those resources are divided out based on the subsystem. Remember, the Big IP has two operating systems installed, or two subsystems. There is the AOM, or the management subsystem, and the other, which is important, is the TMM operating system, which is responsible for processing all client and server traffic on the appliance. But these values here are set by default based on the selections below here. So management, which is orange, and you can see how that's being divided out among the CPU, disk, and memory. But the management is provisioned using a small resource profile, and the LTM module is set to nominal or to a normal resource profile. So we're not going to deal with this too much in this video series because we only have one module that is active, which is the LTM, which is provisioned by default. And nominal means that it is applying resources based on common best practices. But once again, provisioning allows you to allocate more resources towards a specific module that is used. So the more resources should always go to the module that is more active and dominant on the appliance compared to other potential resources. So let's go ahead and let's continue on with our setup utility. We'll leave everything here to the best practice defaults. On this page, this will show the IP, the mask, and the default gateway used for the management interface. So we're not going to change anything there, but we are going to enter a new host name, and that will require adding a domain name to it. And this name will be similar to our virtual machine name. And we'll add a domain to it. All right, next is the host IP address. And this is how we can manage our Big IP appliance. Now by default, it will use the management address and the dedicated interface, which is how we were able to access the interface now. Or you can use a custom host address, but using the dedicated management address and interface is the recommended option. There's no need to really change and use the custom option. Now, under user administration, let's enter a new password for the root account and our admin account. Let's confirm the password. And of course, remember the root account is what we use for accessing the console of the Big IP, and the admin account is what we use for accessing the web utility of the Big IP itself. And also we have SSH, which is enabled by default, which we will leave enabled. And all SSH sessions will be allowed from any IP address on the network, or of course you can specify a range of addresses that are permitted for SSH access, but we will allow all addresses. So we are done here. So let's go ahead and click on next to continue. And because we changed the passwords, we'll be prompted to log back in using the new admin password. So we'll say okay. Let's log in using the new admin password. Okay, and we are now back in, and the next part of the setup utility is the network configuration. We can do this through the setup wizard, which is recommended, or through the advanced option, which will stop and finish the configuration through the setup wizard or the setup utility. But let's use the standard network configuration path, So we'll go up here and click on Next. So on this first page, this will ask us if we want to set up high availability, but we will not do this at this time. So we'll go ahead and uncheck these two options and we will say Next. Here, we need to configure the internal or LAN-facing interface on our BIPLTM appliance based on our design. So we will enter the IP address and the mask for the internal facing interface. And that'll be .201.1 with a Class C mask. Okay, for the port lockdown, we will allow everything, which is the default. Okay, next we need to specify what the internal interface will be on our appliance. And this is done under the internal VLAN configuration section. So in the field of available that is shown here, you will see a list of interfaces. Well, if you are using the virtual appliance edition, this can be confusing. How do you know which one is the internal or external or the HA port for that matter? If you remembered, when we imported our virtual machine into VMware ESXi, we set up the network mappings for that section. And the interfaces were listed in a specific order, and it was important to remember that order because that is how they are listed on the web utility page. So the management interface is not listed here. It will be identified as management. And therefore, the entry of 1.1 is the internal interface. 1.2 is the external interface, and 1.3 would be the HA interface. Therefore, we will select 1.1 and we will move it to the untagged interface since we won't be using any VLAN configuration on our appliance. Let's say Next. Next, we need to configure our external facing interface on the appliance, and this will be created as a new VLAN external profile since this is a new deployment on our appliance. So let's enter the correct IP and mask that will be applied based on our design diagram. That'd be 1.2 with a Class C mask. Okay, now since this is the external interface that will connect upward to our data center and how clients will connect with our load balanced server farm, we need to define the default gateway that should be used for routing back to each client request. So let's enter that address, which would be our firewall of 1.1. There it is. For port lockdown, which we do want to be more restrictive, since this is external facing, we will allow only HTTPS access to that address directly. Okay, now we need to associate this to the interface that will be our external interface, and that will be 1.2. So let's move that to the untagged section. Now we are finished. So let's go ahead and say finish to complete our SetupUtility configuration. And this is what we will see moving forward for all other configuration that we will do on our appliance.